Matthew chapter 5 begins with Jesus. He's going up to the mountaintop. Text tells us that as he goes up the mountain, he sits down to begin giving what is recorded to be his longest sermon in the Gospels. Now, it must be noted who is at this monumental occasion. See, the chapter opens with the gospel writer revealing that Jesus was actually withdrawing from the crowd. Text said he was walking away from the crowd with the intentions of only addressing his disciples. Jesus went up the mountain, and only those who were committed to him and who were committed to his cause climbed up the mountain with him. This action implies that the message that Jesus was getting ready to give in Matthew chapter 5, chapter 6, and chapter 7, which is known as the Sermon on the Mount, this message was not intended for everybody to hear it. This message was only for those who were willing to walk with Jesus, because everybody could not receive the revelation that was entailed in this message. This message was meant to guide and regulate the practice of those who heard it. So Jesus was instructing his disciples, he was shaping their identity, and he was teaching them a lifestyle that hinged on moral principles. Jesus was teaching the meaning of obedience to God in such a way that it explained the radical devotion to God's will that God expected. This message did not only express God's will, but this message offered a vision of God's empire, a vision that provided life in an alternative community marked by justice. It transformed social relationships and created a devotion to engaging in the common good. Contemporaries would compare this community to the modern day beloved community. A community which all people share in the wealth of the earth, and poverty and hunger and homelessness is no longer tolerated, and racism and all forms of discrimination, bigotry, and prejudice is replaced by an inclusive spirit of sisterhood and brotherhood. Jesus' words were so radical that the crowd could not handle what he was getting ready to say. It's safe to assume that the modern day crowd of the world still may not be able to handle such a radical and transformative message. Jesus, as he did then, still disrupts the status quo. Jesus has a way of taking what we believe to be normal, what we believe to be right, and has a way of turning it all around. And in doing so, Jesus shatters all society's notions and brings to light God's will for humanity. Now, we must understand that subjecting ourselves to God's will is often challenging, because it causes us to forsake the things of this world. It causes us to forsake all that this world has taught us in an effort to accept God's divine nature and God's divine plan for our life. So when we accept Christ, we should look as the world looks. When we accept Christ, we become the ones who are willing to make the climb up the mountain and to hear the radical and transformative message that Jesus has in store for us. When we accept Christ, we become committed to his cause and we become committed to him. When we accept Christ, we begin exercising a strong resistance to the ways of the world. Evil is no longer our companion. Sin is no longer our company keeper. For when we accept Christ, we become advocates for the truth, activists for justice, and agents of God's will. All with the purpose of spreading the gospel message and being the manifestation of God's kingdom here on earth. But this task is challenging. This task is also often convicting. It's hard following Jesus. If you believe it's easy, I don't know how you're making it, but it's hard following Jesus. It requires sacrifice to follow Jesus. It takes demands of denying your human self and your human nature to follow Jesus. The things you used to do, you can't do it no more when you follow Jesus. You see, it requires a high level of faith to follow Jesus. And it is not meant for those who only want to follow the crowd. If all you want to do is live your life following the crowd, following Jesus ain't for you. Because Jesus causes us to follow him. And oftentimes when we follow him, we are called to stand against the crowd rather than following the crowd. Therefore, Jesus' message to his disciple was and still is countercultural. And it requires a level of trust in God that overcomes human nature. Just look at the text. Jesus declares in Matthew chapter 5, verse 38 and 39, you have heard an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on your cheek, turn the other side. Whew. This is such a challenging word. Jesus is mandating that his followers subject themselves to risk of further abuse, even when they've already been abused. How can one reconcile such a message? You see, this question is so timely given the state of racial and economic tensions in America. You see, there's a host of people who suffer intense discrimination that is solely rooted in the color of their skin. Not only that, there are so many people in America who suffer intense discrimination as a result of their economic status. We do not live in a post-racial society. No, we do not live in a wealth-blind society. But we do live in a world where people are abused by their neighbor. They're abused by their enemy. They are even abused by agents of their government. We live in a world where a poor black girl or a poor black boy can be victims of systematic oppression even when they try to overcome it themselves. Given this reality, the text states that we are not to run from evil. That when we are smacked down, we are supposed to give our other cheek. Again, I ask the question, how can we live with such a message? How can we reconcile such a message? It is imperative to note that Jesus in the text is rejecting the notion of retaliation and demands instead of a response of what people expect you to do when they hit you, what do they expect you to do when they curse you out, what they expect you to do when they call you outside your name. Jesus is saying do the exact opposite. When someone does you wrong, instead of returning the wrong back to them, Jesus is encouraging his disciples not to seek revenge or to be passive or indifferent, but he is telling his disciples to oppose with a strong resistance. You see, this strong resistance is rooted in the grace of God. This strong resistance is demonstrating good in the face of evil. And I don't know about you, but if you live long enough, you find that it's often hard to return good when those have been evil unto you. When someone says something to you, you want to go and say something back to them. But the text says, no, don't say anything back to them. Respond to them in an action of love. To some, this seems weak. Let's just be honest. To some, this response seems very passive. Seems like you just want to run from a fight. For some, this response is just not good enough because they want something more. But this response is not meant to appease our appetite for makeshift justice. Because believe it or not, we might think we know justice, but God is the only one who knows justice. What we want is vengeance, but we don't always know justice. It is God who orchestrates what justice really looks like. And we must remember that our responsibility is not to make our own justice, but our responsibility is to do justice. Preacher, how do we do justice? We do justice by doing God's will. For when you are doing God's will, you are doing what God has commanded in the time of need. Thus our response is It's never to follow our emotions. Our response is to follow God's will. This response is meant to challenge the aggressor by grace rather than by retaliation. And you know what? This response contradicts human reaction. Because human reaction is to fight back. Human reaction is to run. But God is saying, no, don't fight back. No, don't run. But instead of doing either of these, show love. Love is a strong resistance. Love is more powerful than any hand of evil that can come against you. Love has the ability of shaming the ones who do you wrong. Love has the power of showing those who are wrong the way that is right in the eyes of God. Love restores your dignity, even when people try to take it from you. Love restores your agency when people try to tell you you can't do what God has called you to do. Love no longer makes you the oppressed, but love makes you the victor, knowing that God is the one who can fight your battles. And Jesus is making the claim, instead of avenging against someone, bear it patiently. How radical a message this is. Our radical Savior demonstrates such a radical response because, remember, he too was persecuted. But he did not respond to his persecution in retaliation, but he responded in love. I remember in the text seeing Jesus on the cross. Jesus is on the cross. They have beaten him, nails in his hands, nails in his feet. And the one thing that Jesus says, among the many things, he says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Such a response is love. Knowing that the sin that they are implying on him, they don't know how wrong they really are. But instead of responding back, because he could have called angels to come and take him down from the cross. He could have wiped his enemies out. He could have responded with retaliation. But yet, he loved them. Loved them so much that he died for them. And we too are called to bear such persecution. We too are called to bear with humility and meekness, and knowing that our response does not label us as weak. No, you are not weak when you respond in love. Matter of fact, you are very strong. Amen. Because it takes a strong and courageous person to follow the will of God. You are strong because you're demonstrating the strength of God. In our efforts to turn the other cheek, we must demonstrate our own trust in God and our own belief that God has the power to protect you even in the face of evil. Turning the other cheek, as the text admonishes us to do, is not meant to open you for the risk of a new wound, but turning the cheek is in fact meant to prevent another one from occurring. Because you must remember, evil begets evil. Responding with vengeance is opening you up to more violence and destruction. But when you practice a strong resistance, you allow God to reveal to you how God has a way of convicting evil even in front of your face. God has a way of making your enemies submit to the power of the love of God. Even when they plan to destroy you, even when they plan to take you out, God has a way of reminding us, even in chaotic and tragic situations, that vengeance is not ours, but vengeance is God. And I don't know about you, but I'd rather God fight my battle than me fight it for myself, because God has the power of overturning any situation. We must remember that it is God who rewards us with eternal glory for the shame and the ridicule we temporarily face even now. Oh, don't get it twisted. This is not your home. You're only here temporary. And the struggles you face now are just that, temporary. And if you can endure the temporary struggle now, if you can go through the temporary storm now, just when the Lord calls you home, you can receive the eternal glory that is waiting for you on the other side. You see, the strong resistance is not for the faint at heart. This strong resistance is not for those who are looking for the easy way out. This strong resistance is hard. It's a hard word because it takes dedication. This strong resistance takes faithfulness. It takes love. And what Jesus does, what I love about this text is that Jesus makes the point. Verse 46 and 47 makes the point. It's easy to love those who are lovable. You loving somebody that wants to be loved by you, that's easy. You can make it work. There's no honor in doing what can easily be done. The honor is loving those who don't want to be loved by you. The honor is loving those who are called themselves your enemy and praying for those who persecute you. This is the moral appeal that is grounded in the nature of God himself. Jesus declares in our text to love your enemies, to pray for those who persecute you so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. That's it right there. That's the key, that you might be children of your Father in heaven. Let me say it again, that you might be children of your Father in heaven. Those who obey God, they are seeking to emulate God's character. To be a child of the Most High God is to resemble God in a manner that makes God happy. Oh, you already know this. You know, you growing up, people used to tell you, you look just like your mama, or you look just like your father. And what it means to be a child of God, that means our actions look just like our Father in heaven. So if we can love our enemies even when they hate us, if we can pray for those who persecute us, we don't look like the enemy, we don't look like the world, but we look like our Father who is Almighty God. That's when we become children of the Most High God, when we act the way that God has called us to act, when we no longer walk like we used to walk, or talk like we used to talk, or respond to people the way we used to people. When we follow God's will for our life, we become God's children, expressing to all the love of Jesus Christ. That's strong resistance. That's strong resistance. That takes heart. That takes courage. Remember, God, as the text says, God is the one who makes the sun rise. The text says on the evil and on the good. God sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. And here we are. Help me, Holy Ghost. Here we are. Come to church on Sunday morning. And we think God doesn't bless those who don't deserve God's blessings. We must remember God blesses everybody. The just and the unjust. And we must remember that even in our righteousness, our righteousness is as filthy rags unto the Lord. So even when you think you got it together, when you put your got it together beside God who got it all, it ain't nothing. So it is God who blesses everybody. Whether you want to be blessed or you don't want to be blessed, God still blesses everybody. And if God blesses everybody, those who believe and those who do not believe, we are called to love everybody. Those who don't even want us to love them, we are called to love them anyhow. Because in doing so, we are acting as God has demonstrated to us, as we sung this morning, great is the faithfulness of God. Morning by mornings, even when we don't deserve it, new mercies we see. Amen. That's right. This is what we are called to do. A strong resistance. Love those that don't even want to be loved by us. And what the text says in verse 48, he says, this is perfect. This is perfect. Now let me break something up for y'all today. Come on. Perfect doesn't mean it meets your standards. Come on. Perfect doesn't mean that it meets the world's standards. Perfect actually means it is God's complete will for us to act in a manner that expresses God's love. That is God's will. A strong resistance. Turning the other cheek and loving those who do us wrong. That's God's will. And what God's will does, it does not beget violence, no. But what it does, it allows for peace to occur. Reason why we don't have peace in the community is because we're not doing God's will. If we would do God's will, we could have peace in our community. The reason why there's more violence is because we take vengeance into our own hands. But we don't allow God to work the situation out the way that God has deemed it necessary. That is a strong resistance to allow God to have God's way. It's peace. It's complete. And what I love about this is that it also provides for healing. When we respond to violence with violence, when we respond to hate with hate, no healing can take place. Hurt people hurt people. But whole people can restore hurt people. That's what we are called to do. A strong resistance is to help restore hurt people and help them to know that there is a God who is able. As I prepare to close, I'm reminded of a hymn. Words of the hymn says that though Satan should buffet, though trials should come, let this blessed assurance control that Christ has regarded our helpless estate and has shed his own blood for our soul. Christ has made it possible for us to act in a strong resistance. Christ has made it possible for us to love those who hate us and to turn our cheek even in the face of confrontation. Christ has made it possible that we no longer are at risk for more violence, but Christ has made it possible that we might be able to receive peace. Christ has made it possible for us because Christ has taken into account your trials and your tribulations. Christ sees all that you are going through. Christ sees the pain that you have endured. Christ sees the tears that you cry. Christ sees the hurt that is within your heart. And what Christ does, Christ has laid his life down for you to let you know that no matter what you're going through, love has the power to lift you up. Love has the power to restore you. Love has the power to heal you. Love has the power to deliver you. Love has the power. Christ died for each and every one of us to remind us that the struggles of this earth cannot compare to the glory of our coming kingdom. The struggles of this earth are only temporary. And if we respond to them in love, we can overcome whatever comes our way. If we respond to them, love conquers all things. Love conquers all things, no matter what you're going through. Love of God has the power to conquer it all. And that is a strong resistance to all the troubles in this world. Just to love and to respond in God's love. You ain't weak when you do that. You ain't no punk when you do that. That takes strength. Godly strength. Strength that is made perfect even in our weakness. That's the love of God. That's the power of God's love.